The next thing we want to do today is we want to take a look at all of the different types of interest groups. So we will categorize interest groups into four main groups here and go through some examples of some interest groups that you've probably heard of. Like here you see the ACLU. This is the American Civil Liberties Union. So an interest group that looks after civil liberties protections. The first type of interest group we have is our most obvious type because they are an interest group that advocates for a specific policy goal. Like they want to get a policy changed or they want to protect a policy, make sure it stays the same. But they advocate all about the idea of one policy area. So this is what most people think about when they think about interest groups. These are groups that have specific policies in mind. They're going to work with lawmakers. They're going to work with decision makers at all different levels of government to make them, to try to get them to pass policies that they want or to change existing laws that will be more in line with something that the group likes. Some examples of these type of interest groups. These are probably some of the, these are the ones that I think you guys would have come across before. The National Rifle Association might be one of the country's most famous interest groups. They advocate for the protection of gun rights. So this is a very visible, very big, powerful interest group that's heavily involved in politics. The NRA would be an example of a policy group, a group that advocates for gun rights. PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They advocate for policies that protect animal rights and protect the treatment of animals. So another one we've talked about, one that I'm sure you guys have come across somewhere. PETA is very visible out there in politics. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They focus on civil liberties. God, I hope you remember what civil liberties are. These are the protections we find in the Bill of Rights. So they focus on policy issues relating to free speech and free assembly, protecting the rights of people from illegal searches and things like that. Another one that gets a lot of coverage, a lot of attention in politics is the National Right to Life Committee, which advocates to end abortions in the United States. So these are all examples of groups that organize people around their stances on a particular policy area. We also have some very big interest groups that advocate for the interests of particular groups of people. So these groups are most likely to advocate for a specific demographic group. So they're going to protect the interests of a particular type of person. And these are going to be very, very broad goals. So instead of one policy that they focus on, they'll focus on all of the policies that could impact this particular group. These groups are going to have huge potential groups, and they're going to have really small actual groups. So these are going to be the types of groups that are most susceptible to the free rider problem we were talking about. But these are definitely famous interest groups. I'm sure you guys have heard of these before. Some of our biggest groups that advocate for the rights or the interests of groups of people would be the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They protect the interests of racial minority groups in the United States. So they don't just focus on one policy, but they focus on all types of policies that would impact different minority groups. The AARP, one of our biggest, most powerful interest groups, the American Association of Retired Persons. They protect the interests of super old people. So they have a huge potential group out there, but not that many old people are in the AARP. The AARP does give a lot of selective benefits that you've probably seen. Maybe you've seen them advertise their magazine or their health insurance or stuff like that, but that's trying to lure people into the group. Now, the National Organization for Women protects the interests of women. So they advocate for a demographic group here. They have a huge potential group and not that big of an actual group. The Christian Coalition is an interest group that fights to protect the interests of Christians all across the country. So we have these groups they can fit into any different demographic group here, but they look after the interests of a particular type of person. And so they focus on a variety of policies that could impact the group of people that they're trying to get to join their interest group. We also have professional groups. Professional groups represent a particular profession. These are representing people that end up with the same career. This is different than a labor union. We'll get into that in a minute, but they try to protect the interests of a particular career. So these groups have a smaller potential group. And that means they're going to have an easier time getting their members all working together on the same page because they're focusing on one type of career. You've probably heard of these examples too. The AMA is the American Medical Association. It's an interest group that represents the interests of doctors. So when a law is being passed that can impact what happens with doctors, they're going to be involved. The ABA, the American Bar Association, represents the interests of lawyers. So any kind of law that could impact lawyers, they're going to be a part of. They're going to make sure that their group is protected. The NEA is the National Education Association, an interest group that represents the interests of teachers. So any types of policies that would be made that would impact teachers, they're going to be involved in. When you hear the term the Chamber of Commerce, it sounds like it's a part of the government, but it's actually an interest group that represents business owners. So these are all interest groups. They're all heavily involved in influencing policy, but they focus on like the policies that would impact a particular career. And then finally, we have groups that advocate for workers' rights. And so these represent the interests of workers as opposed to business owners. And most of the time, we just call these labor unions. There are separate, like specific interest groups, but most of these are just what we call labor unions. So in general, they're in some way, they're like looking out for better wages and for better working conditions for workers. They can be like very, very active on like small scales, like in an individual workplace, but they're also very active in like national and local politics as well. So we're going to talk about labor unions a lot, but a couple of examples here. The AFL-CIO is the nation's largest labor union, and so they represent a whole bunch of different types of unions. The Teamsters is a big national labor union that represents all sorts of industrial labor across the country. So like any other interest group, these huge labor unions here will also get involved and try to influence policies. For the rest of what we do today, we're going to focus specifically on labor unions because that is going to be, those are interest groups that cover like millions and millions of people across the country, and they're heavily involved in politics. Here we see a teachers union. This is in Chicago, and these teachers are on strike. I know you would love that. Me too. We could all have some time off. But here, this is an example of like an interest group working to impact policy. In this case, what are the policies for Chicago public schools? So let's talk about labor unions and what they do, and then we'll talk about how policies have impacted labor unions and workers. Labor unions are the interest groups that represent all sorts of workers across all different industries. We have labor unions on small scales, like in individual workplaces. We have huge labor unions that like interact with Congress and stuff like this. But labor unions are advocating for policies that guarantee better working conditions for workers, better wages, all like health coverage, all sorts of things like that. Labor unions are heavily involved in a bunch of different types of policies that would impact workers' rights. Unions exist at like individual workplaces. For example, Shelby County Schools has a union that is specific for Shelby County Schools teachers. They can exist like within one factory or something like that at a specific business. And then there are large nationwide unions, like we mentioned the AFL-CIO. It's actually an organization of a whole bunch of different small unions. And so these large national unions, they lobby and they impact elections. They electioneer at the national level so that they can influence laws that would have a positive impact on workers. One thing that labor unions do that we just got to make sure we know, this is called collective bargaining. This means that the members of the union, all the workers, are able to speak together with one voice when they are negotiating. So this is a process of negotiation between workers and their bosses, like between employers and employees. The union and the management have to like come together and come to agreements about wages, pay scales, hours, safety policies, all kinds of stuff that can impact workers here. But labor unions typically represent all of the workers in collective bargaining. Labor unions have the same problem as other interest groups. There's going to be free riders. There's going to be people that work there that aren't a part of the union and things like that. But the labor union is negotiating on behalf of all of them. The collective bargaining agreement ends up as a contract between all of the workers and the company. So it's like the company has to treat the workers a certain way, and the workers agree to do certain things for the company. Anybody who's hired all new people hired and all people that work there, they work under the rules of the collective bargaining agreement until a new collective bargaining agreement is negotiated on. All right, so those are our main categories of interest groups. We're going to spend the rest of our time today focusing on labor unions, looking a little bit at the history of labor unions and the policies that impact them today.